The stairwell in the west wing of the Cauldron Concord Academy was built for 11 different kinds of legs, and it worked well for none of them. Daniel Reed had learned to climb it early in the morning before the crowd. At that hour, the steps belonged to him. He went up 2 at a time, counting landings out of habit, his bag over one shoulder and his tablet under his arm. Nobody slowed him down. Nobody stepped sideways to avoid brushing against him. For about 4 minutes a day, he moved through the academy like a person instead of an oddity. Then the bell tone rolled through the building, and the day began, and he stopped being a person again. The corridor filled fast. Students came through in quick darting groups, small and fast and never quite still. Behind them, the Harvan walked in their heavy way, plated shoulders swinging, taking up space without meaning to. Auto moved in straight lines and did not turn their heads. 17 species shared this building. Daniel had counted 8 different ways of saying good morning in his first week, and none of them were meant for him. He reached the lecture hall and found Braxel sitting in his seat. It was not a coincidence. It had not been a coincidence for 11 weeks. Braxel was a 4th-year Harvan, wide across the back, with the grey plating that his people grew when they finished their adolescence. He had picked Daniel's seat on the 2nd day of term because it was near the front and because Daniel had been sitting in it. He had never given it back. Daniel stood there a moment. Braxel did not look up. "You are in my seat," Daniel said. "I am in a seat," Braxel said. "Seats do not belong to anyone." 2 of his friends laughed. It was a low laugh, the kind that came from deep in the chest cavity of a species with room for it. Daniel looked at him for 1 more second. Then he walked to the back of the hall, sat down, opened his tablet, and started taking notes. That was the part the other students never understood. He did not argue. He did not go to an administrator. He sat down and he wrote, and if anyone had bothered to look at his screen, they would have seen that he was not writing about the lecture at all. He was writing down the time. He was writing down who had laughed. He kept a file of these things, dated and ordered, and he had been keeping it since his first month. He did not know yet what he would do with it. He only knew that a person who writes everything down eventually knows more than the people who do not. The lecture that morning was comparative predation, and it belonged to instructor Salvo. Salvo was Harvan, older, with plating that had gone almost white along the ridges. He loved his subject the way some people love a house they built themselves. He filled the front of the hall with light projections of the great hunters of the Concord worlds, and he narrated them like a man showing off his children. "The Ossentide hunter," he said, and a shape unfolded above the students, enormous, ribbed, with 3 rows of hooked plates along its spine. 9 meters. It hunts in shallow water. Note the coloration. The plates flushed a deep orange along their edges. "That is a warning," Salvo said. "That is the animal telling you what it is. Every serious predator in the Concord catalog does this. Some flush color, some vocalize. The grinders of the southern belt strike the ground with their forelimbs, and you can hear it 2 kilometers out." He turned to face the room, and he smiled the way Harvan smiled, showing the flat grinding ridges rather than teeth. "Why?" he asked. "Why would a hunter announce itself? It seems foolish. Tell me why." A tur near the front raised a thin arm. "Because fighting costs energy," she said. "If the prey runs first, the hunter wins without a fight." "Correct," Salvo said, delighted. "A predator would rather frighten you than fight you. Fear is cheaper than teeth. This is the founding principle of the field. Remember it. A hunter announces itself." Daniel raised his hand. It took Salvo a moment to notice and another moment to decide to acknowledge it. "Yes, the human." "Is that true everywhere?" Daniel asked. "Is what true everywhere?" "That a hunter announces itself." Daniel's voice was flat and polite. "You said it is the founding principle. I am asking if it is a principle or just a habit of these worlds." The room went quiet in an interested way. Somebody near the middle made a small sound. Salvo laughed. It was not cruel. That was somehow worse. It was the laugh of an adult who has been asked something charming by a child. "It is biology," he said, "not geography. Fear is cheaper than teeth on every world that has ever been catalogued. Now, page 412. Daniel lowered his hand and went back to his notes. He did not argue, he wrote down the time. Behind him, 3 rows up, an Auto student named Nira watched him do it. She was 3rd year, top of her cohort, and she had a habit of noticing small things because small things were usually the ones people forgot to hide. She had noticed that the human never argued. She had also noticed that the human never looked embarrassed, which was strange, because embarrassment was one of the few human signals the Concorde had bothered to catalogue. He looked patient. She could not think of a reason for a person in his position to look patient. Class ended, the hall drained. Braxel passed Daniel's desk on the way out and knocked the tablet off it with his hip, without breaking stride, without looking. Daniel picked it up. The screen had cracked in one corner. He wiped it on his sleeve, checked that it still worked, and put it in his bag. That evening, in the quiet of his room, he opened his Academy account and found a message waiting. It was from the transport office, and it was 5 lines long, and it was the most boring message in the building. Request 4471 has been approved. Transport of 1 registered companion animal, Class D, non-hazardous. Arrival next supply run, Dock 4. Daniel read it twice. Then he sat back in his chair and let out a long breath, and for the first time in 11 weeks, he smiled. Dock 4 smelled like cold metal and cargo grease, and Tico was only there because he had lost a bet. He was first year and small even for his own people, which was saying something. His job that morning was to stand at the manifest console and log incoming freight as it came down the ramp. It was dull work. Crates of lab glass, crates of protein stock, a sealed tank of something that hummed. Then the ramp cycled again, and a human walked down it with an animal beside him. Tico checked his manifest, Class D companion animal, non-hazardous. He looked up again. The creature was about waist-high on the human, black over most of it, with tan across the chest and above the eyes. 4 legs, a tail that hung and did not wag, no plating, no spines, no color flush anywhere on its body. It had ears that stood up and turned slightly, tracking sounds, and that was the only part of it that moved on its own. Tico relaxed. It was nothing. It was a small 4-legged thing with soft skin, exactly the sort of animal that got eaten on most worlds. Doc log, Tico said. Name for the record. Rook, the human said. Species classification. Domestic quadruped, companion class. The human said it the way a person reads a form aloud. Tico typed it in. Then, because he was young and curious and had never touched an alien animal before, he crouched down and held out one thin hand. May I? He's fine, the human said. The animal did not move toward him. It did not move away either. It simply allowed the hand, and Tico's fingers found short, coarse fur over a body that was much denser than it looked. There was warmth under there. There was a slow, steady beat. And then something happened in Tico's chest that he had no word for. Every Tur carried instincts from a homeworld where his ancestors had been small and quick and eaten. Those instincts were noisy. They fired constantly, at shadows, at sudden noises, at anything overhead. Tico had lived his whole life inside that low background hum of alarm and had stopped noticing it, the way a person stops hearing a fan. Crouched there with his hand on the animal's shoulder, the hum stopped. It did not calm. It stopped, completely, the way a small animal goes still and silent when the thing hunting it is already close enough that running would be a mistake. Tico stood up fast. His hand was shaking. Are you all right? The human asked. Yes, Tico said, which was not true. Yes, it is very. It is a nice animal. He is, Daniel Reed said, and walked on, and the animal went with him, and Tico watched them go and could not shake the feeling that he had just put his hand on something that had decided not to. Over the following days, the Academy adjusted to the presence of the human's pet with almost no friction at all, and that was the problem. Nobody objected because there was nothing to object to. The animal followed rules that nobody had written. It walked at Daniel's left knee, always the left, and the distance between its shoulder and his leg never changed by more than a hand's width. It sat when he stopped. It lay down when he sat. It did not beg, did not wander, did not sniff at other students, did not react to the loud clattering of the food hall. Neera watched it for 3 days before she understood what was bothering her. She was Ordo, her people thought in sequences and noticed when a sequence broke. On the 4th day, she sat in the west corridor with a data slate and simply recorded audio for 2 hours while students passed. The academy floors were engineered. Every corridor surface in the building was laid over an acoustic feedback layer, a safety feature, so that footfalls registered on the maintenance grid and the system could tell if someone had fallen. It was not a sensitive system, but it worked. Neera reviewed the recording that night. She could hear Haven footfalls like dropped stones. She could hear the light scatter of Tur. She could hear the human's boots, a soft double tap, left and right. She could not hear the animal. It weighed, by her estimate, 40 kilograms. It walked directly beside the human on the same floor. And across 2 hours of recording, across hundreds of steps, the feedback layer registered nothing from it at all. She ran the file 3 times, then she sat very still in her room for a while. Braxel, meanwhile, thought the whole thing was the funniest event of the term. He brought a pet, he told his friends in the food hall, loudly enough to carry 4 tables. He could not manage on his own, so they shipped him a comfort creature. Look at it, look at the thing, it does not even have plates. He said it while the human was eating 20 steps away. He said it again on the stairs. He said it in the lab corridor, and each time he said it, he got a little bolder, because nothing happened. The animal never reacted to Braxel. Not once. It did not growl. It did not stand. It lay under the table with its head on its paws and its eyes half closed. But Tico, sitting across from Daniel, with a bowl he was not eating from, noticed something that made his hands go cold again. The animal's eyes were half closed. They were not closed. And every single time Braxel spoke, from anywhere in the hall, at any volume, one ear turned. Just one, just slightly, tracking him across the room, through noise, through crowds, without any other part of the body moving at all. Tico put his spoon down. "Daniel," he said quietly, "your animal, what was it for?" Daniel looked up. "What do you mean for?" "Everything is for something. My people bred draft beasts for pulling. The Haven bred grazers for meat." Tico chose his next words carefully. "It watches doors. I have been counting. It looks at every person's hands when they come near you, and then it looks at the door they came in through. That is not a comfort creature. That is a job." For a moment, Daniel did not answer. Then an administrator came down the aisle, a polite Ordo with a slate, who had been sent because somebody's parent had sent a letter. "Student read, a formality only. Is the animal safe around students?" "Yes," Daniel said. The administrator marked it and left, satisfied. Tico sat there and thought about the question, and about the answer, and about how the answer had been completely true and had not touched the question at all. Instructor Salvo had been teaching comparative predation for 41 years, and in that time he had learned that the best lessons were the ones the students could touch. So when he heard that the human had brought a live alien animal into the academy, he did not see a nuisance. He saw a gift. He sent the request himself, politely worded, copied to the faculty board. A rare opportunity, he wrote, an uncatalogued specimen from a low-tier world. Students would be permitted to perform a live threat assessment on a species none of them had studied. Excellent practice. He did not write down the other reason. He was not fully honest with himself about it. But the human had asked him a question in front of 40 students, and the question had been mildly disrespectful, and Salvo had a long career and a certain amount of pride, and he thought it would be pleasant to have the human stand at the front of the hall beside his pet, while 40 students rated it as harmless. Daniel read the request and agreed without argument. The hall was full that morning. Word had gone around. Students who did not take the course came and stood along the back wall, and Salvo pretended not to notice and was privately pleased. Daniel walked in at the tone with the animal beside him and stopped at the front, where a low examination platform had been set up. He did not look nervous. He looked like a man waiting for a lift. "Sit," he said. The animal sat. Salvo spread his heavy arms. "Observe," he said. "This is the value of live assessment. A catalog image tells you nothing. Here we have a real creature from a world none of you have visited, and you know nothing about it. So, assess." He walked a slow circle around the platform. "Begin with armament. Tell me what you see." A Havan near the front spoke up. "No plating, no shell. The skin is soft over the entire body." "Correct. Continue." "No spines, no visible venom organ, no striking limbs." "Correct. Teeth." Daniel said, without being asked, "Open." The animal opened its mouth. 40 students leaned forward. "Teeth," Salvo said, dismissing them with a wave. "Small, note the size relative to the skull. Compare with the Ossentide hunter, which we studied last week. Those were 40 centimeters. These are what, 3, 4, he chuckled. "It could injure you, so could a door." Continue, display organs. The hall was quiet. "None," said the Harvard student. "No coloration, no crest, no flush." "None," Salvo agreed. "Vocalization." "I have never heard it make a sound," someone said from the middle of the room. "Nobody has," said someone else. Salvo turned to the room with his arms open, the way a performer turns. "So," he said, "here is a creature with no armor, no significant teeth, no venom, no display coloration, and no warning call. It cannot threaten you. It cannot even tell you that it wants to. Remember the founding principle: a hunter announces itself, because fear is cheaper than teeth. This animal has no way to make you afraid. Therefore it has no way to hunt anything larger than a small pest." He spread his hands. "Rate it." The slates came up. Category 5, Category 5, Category 5. 40 students, the lowest rating on the Concord scale, almost unanimous. At the back of the room, Nira did not raise her slate at all. She had rated nothing. She was watching the animal's eyes, and she had been watching them since it entered the room, and in 11 minutes, she had counted the animal look at every single exit in the hall 4 separate times. "Excellent," Salvo said. "Now, one last demonstration: predator response thresholds. In most species, if you approach the animal's keeper aggressively, you will trigger a defensive display, and we can measure the threshold at which that display begins." He smiled his flat Harvan smile at Daniel. "You will forgive me. This is only a demonstration." "Instructor," Daniel said, "I would rather you didn't." "It is quite safe. I outmass it by a factor of 4. That isn't the part I'm worried about." Salvo laughed and stepped forward and raised one broad-plated hand toward the human's shoulder. The animal did not growl. It did not bark or bare its teeth or raise its fur or make any sound whatsoever. There was no warning, because there was nothing anyone in that room would have recognized as a warning. It simply stood up and moved. It crossed the space between the platform and the instructor in a single unhurried motion, put itself between Salvo's raised hand and the human, and stopped there. Then it looked up at him. That was all. Nothing else happened. Salvo stopped moving. He would think about it for years afterward and never be able to explain to himself or anyone why he stopped. Nothing had touched him. Nothing had made a sound. The creature's mouth was closed. Its ears were up. Its tail hung loose. By every measure in the field he had built his life around, nothing at all had occurred. He took a step backward. He did not decide to do it. His body did it and told him afterward. In the seats, 40 biometric bands spiked at once. Tico's heart rate went from 91 to 280 in under 2 seconds, and he sat frozen with his hands flat on the desk. 2 students in the 3rd row found that they could not stand up. A Havan near the aisle later reported that his plating had locked at full rigidity, an involuntary response his people only had in deep water. The bands logged all of it, time-stamped, on 17 different evolutionary lineages in the same half-second. The hall was completely silent. Salvo's voice, when it came, was not steady. It gave no warning, he said. Daniel reached down and touched the top of the animal's head with 2 fingers. It came back to his side and sat. It did, Daniel said. You just didn't recognize it, because you've never had to. There was no display, no sound, nothing. That's the warning. Salvo stared at him. On my world, Daniel said, the things that warn you first are the things you're allowed to survive. Snakes rattle, wasps have stripes. Those are all animals telling you they'd rather not fight because fighting is expensive and they might lose. He looked down at the animal at his knee. The things at the top of our food chain don't do any of that. They don't need you scared. They need you close and unaware and comfortable. Silence isn't the absence of a threat display. It's a different strategy. It's the one that works when you don't need help winning. Nobody spoke. You asked me 11 weeks ago whether it was biology or geography, Daniel said. I think you have your answer. Salvo dismissed the class 30 minutes early. 40 students filed out of the hall, and every one of them was silent, and not one of them could have said why that felt so much worse than noise. There were 904 files in the Concorde's Human Biological Archive, and Nira was the first person to open most of them in 11 years. She knew this because the system logged access, and the log was short. 11 years ago, a survey team had catalogued Earth, filed their findings, and moved on. Since then, a linguist had opened 4 files. A trade officer had opened 2. That was all. 904 files about an entire living world sitting untouched in a drawer nobody thought was worth the trouble of pulling out. She started because of the biometric logs. She had pulled them the night after the lecture, all 40 bands, and laid them over one another on her screen. The result was the strangest data she had ever seen. 40 individuals from 17 species with 17 completely different evolutionary histories, different sensory ranges, different fear architectures. A Havan and a Tur did not even hear the same frequencies. They should not have been frightened by the same thing at the same instant. They had been within 400 milliseconds of each other, in response to an animal that had performed no measurable threat display whatsoever. Nira was Ordo, and Ordo did not believe in things that had no cause. So she went looking for the cause, and the cause was not in the room, so it had to be in the animal, and the animal was not in the catalogue. She started reading. The first thing she found was a mistake in the file header. The animal's entry was listed under Domestic Quadrupeds, Companion Class, which was where the Concorde filed pets, but the entry cross-referenced a second file, and the second file was in the Predator catalogue. Same species, 2 entries. She opened the Predator file and found a photograph of something that looked almost exactly like the animal that slept under Daniel Reed's desk. Same skull shape, same forward-set eyes, same body plan. It was larger, grayer, longer in the leg, and the file described it as a pack-hunting apex predator native to the northern landmasses of Earth, capable of running prey to exhaustion over distances of 30 kilometers. The word pack caught her attention, and she read on, and then she stopped reading and read the same paragraph again. Hunts cooperatively in coordinated groups of 6 to 12, uses silent positional signaling, employs pursuit strategy rather than ambush or intimidation. Nira sat back. Pursuit, not ambush, not display, not intimidation. The animal did not frighten prey into stillness. It simply followed it until the prey could not run anymore. There was no point in warning something you intended to outlast. An entire predation strategy that the Concorde's founding principle did not account for, because on Concorde worlds it had never evolved. But that was not the part that kept her awake. The part that kept her awake was the connection between the 2 files. She traced it through 11 cross-references and found the survey team's note, written in the dry voice of scientists who did not understand that they were writing down something enormous. The domestic form is derived from the wild form through sustained artificial selection by the native sapient species. She read it 4 times. Then she went and found Daniel Reed in the library, sitting at a table with the animal asleep under it, and she put her slate down in front of him. "Explain this," she said. He looked at the screen. "That's a wolf. It says the companion animal is derived from it." "It is. Derived how?" Daniel closed his book. "We bred them," he said, "over a long time. You take the ones that are calmer around people, and you let those have young, and you do it again and again, and after enough generations, you get something that looks different and acts different and still has everything the original had." "Everything." "Everything." He said it without any drama at all, which somehow made it worse. "We didn't take the predator out. There's no way to take it out. We just pointed it." Nera stood there. "There is no word for this," she said finally. "In any Concord language, the linguists translated your term as tamming. I think tamming is the wrong word." "It is. Tamming means the removal of the hunter." "Nothing was removed," Daniel said. Nera went back to the archive that night and did not sleep, and by morning she had found the number, and the number was the thing that broke her. She had assumed a timeline any reasonable person would have. A species reaches technological maturity, gains the tools to control large animals safely, and then begins domestication as a project of an advanced civilization. That was the order it had happened in for every Concord species that had domesticated anything. First the tools, then the animals. The Haven domesticated their grazers 800 years after they smelted their first metal. Humans had not done it in that order. The date in the file was 15,000 years before agriculture, before writing, before metal of any kind, before permanent settlements, before the wheel, before pottery. The humans who had walked up to an apex pack predator and begun the work of making it theirs had been carrying sharpened stone. They had not had a single tool that could reliably kill one of these animals in a straight fight. They had no cities to retreat into. They had no medicine. A bite meant infection, and infection meant death. They had been cold, hungry, few in number, and losing, and their solution had not been to build a better spear. Their solution had been to walk toward the thing that was hunting them and offer it food. And it had worked, and they had done it for 30,000 years without stopping, all over the world, in every climate, hundreds of separate times, until there were 400 different kinds of the animal, and each kind had been shaped for a purpose. Some to pull, some to find, some to herd, some to guard. And one kind, the file noted in a single flat line, for exactly what Nera had watched in that lecture hall. She brought all of it to the faculty board 3 days later. She presented for 40 minutes. She showed the biometric overlay. She showed the 2 catalog entries and the 11 cross-references. She showed the date, and she explained what the date meant, and she asked the board to open a review of humanity's threat classification. The board thanked her for her diligence and declined. They gave 3 reasons, and none of them were reasons. The archive was old and unverified. The incident involved a single animal and a single student. The classification board had reviewed humanity 11 years ago, and the board did not reopen settled matters without cause. Nera understood the real reason perfectly well as she walked out. Accepting her research meant accepting that the Concord's threat assessment system had been built on a principle that was regional rather than universal, and that the assessment had therefore been wrong in writing for 11 years about a species they had been quietly condescending to the entire time. The Concord did not enjoy being wrong. She stopped in the corridor and looked out through the long window at the pale blue curve of the gas giant below. She had one more sentence in her notes that she had not read to the board, because she had known how it would sound. Of the 18 member species, only one has ever successfully formed an alliance with a predator capable of killing it. She had thought, when she wrote it, that it was an interesting observation. Standing in the corridor, she began to suspect it was a warning. Braxel spent 9 days planning it, and he was proud of the plan because the plan accounted for the animal. That was the part everyone else had failed at. They looked at the human and they saw the human. Braxel looked at the human and saw a soft-skinned second year who could not lift a cargo crate, standing next to 40 kilograms of the only thing in the building anyone was actually afraid of. Remove the 40 kilograms and you had nothing left but a student who could be broken with one hand. So he studied the animal's schedule. It went everywhere with Daniel Reed except two places. It did not go into the wet labs because Academy safety rules forbade unsealed organics near the culture tanks. And it did not go into the residence block corridors after the night cycle began because it was locked in the human's room behind a standard pressure door on a standard magnetic seal 3 levels above the service corridors. Braxel checked that seal himself. He walked past the door 4 nights running. It was a Concorde seal rated for atmosphere. It had no handle on the inside. A Haven could not open it without a code. Nothing without hands could open it at all. That was the whole plan. Wait for the night cycle. Get the human alone in the service corridor on the way back from the late lab. No monitors down there because there was nothing worth watching. 3 of them. Enough damage that the human would withdraw from the academy and go home, and afterward Braxel would say the animal did it, and 40 students who had rated that animal category 5 would suddenly be very willing to believe it was dangerous. It was, Braxel thought, an elegant plan. It used the fear against the human instead of for him. On the 9th night, he stood in the service corridor with 2 of his friends and waited. And at the 23rd hour, Daniel Reed came around the corner alone with a case of lab glass in his hands. He stopped when he saw them. He did not look surprised. That was the first small thing that bothered Braxel, though he did not let it slow him down. The human set the case down on the floor, carefully, the way you put down something breakable. "Go back," Daniel said. "There is no one down here," Braxel said. "I checked. There are no monitors on this level." "I know, I checked too." That was the second small thing. "Your creature is in your room," Braxel said, 3 levels up, behind a sealed door. "Yes. So there is nothing between you and me." Daniel looked at him for a long moment, and there was something in his face that Braxel would think about for the rest of his life, because it was not fear. It was something closer to regret. "Braxel," he said, "I'm asking you, go back upstairs. Whatever happens after this, I want it on the record that I asked." Braxel took a step forward. He had time to take exactly one more. He never heard it coming. That was the detail he could not make anyone understand afterward, no matter how many times he was asked. There was no sound in the corridor, no claws on the deck, no breathing, no growl, no impact from the far end of the passage. There was simply a moment in which Braxel was standing, and then a moment in which the deck plating was against his face, and there was a weight across his shoulders that he could not shift, and the entire distance between those 2 moments was gone. He weighed 3 times what the animal did. He was Haven. He had plating across his back and shoulders that could take a fall from 2 stories. He could not move. The animal had put him down with his own momentum and its own mass in a way that had nothing to do with strength, and now it stood over him with its jaws closed around his forearm, the plating gripped between teeth that had not broken a single seam of it, holding without crushing, and it did not make a sound. It did not shake him. It did not tear. It did not growl. It simply held him and waited. Braxel's 2 friends had run. He heard them go. He would have run too. He lay there on the cold, plating with an apex predator's mouth on his arm and his heart's hammering, and he understood, with total clarity, that the thing on top of him was not angry. That was the horror. It was not angry. It had made no decision in the heat of anything. It had come 3 levels down through a sealed door and put him on the floor, and it was now waiting, calmly, the way a worker waits for the next instruction. Braxel could not see the human. He could hear footsteps coming, unhurried. They stopped beside his head. "Rook," Daniel said, "out." That was all. One word, said in a normal voice, no louder than a person ordering food. The weight lifted immediately. The jaws opened and were gone from his arm in the same instant, and the animal stepped back and sat down beside the human's left knee and became, once again, a quiet 4-legged thing with soft skin and no plating and a tail lying flat on the deck. Braxel got up slowly. His arm ached. The plating was scored but not cracked. There was no blood anywhere. He realized, not been injured at all, and somehow that made his hands shake harder than a wound would have. "Go to the medical station," Daniel said. "Tell them whatever you like. I'm not filing anything." "You are not filing anything," Braxel repeated. "No. Why?" Daniel picked up his case of lab glass. "Because you already know," he said, and walked away, and the animal went with him and made no sound at all. The Academy engineering staff spent the next 11 days arguing about the door. The residence seal on room 4118 was intact. It had not been forced, cracked, damaged, or overridden. The maintenance log showed that at the 23rd hour and 4 minutes, the seal had cycled open, and 40 seconds later, it had cycled closed again, and no code had been entered at the panel because the panel had not been touched. 3 separate engineers filed 3 separate reports. One suggested a system fault. One suggested the human had left it unlatched, which the log directly contradicted. The third wrote a single line that was quietly removed from the final record before it went to the board. It wrote, the report said, that the animal had opened the door and that the animal had waited 9 days to do it. But it was the word that everyone came back to. Because in the days that followed, as the story went through the academy, the students did not talk about the speed or the door or the fact that a Haven had been put on the floor by something a quarter of his mass. They talked about the one word at the end. "Rook out." And every single one of them arrived at the same place. If it stopped on a word, then it had never been out of control. If it had never been out of control, then every single thing it had done in that corridor, it had chosen to do. And if a creature that fast and that silent was making choices, then it was not the creature that had decided the outcome. The human had. The human had been deciding it the whole time, in every room, from the moment he arrived, and had simply never needed to say anything out loud. Nira read the engineering report twice, filed her copy, and requested an emergency session of the Concord Classification Board. This time they did not decline. The Concord Review Board arrived in a transport painted the flat grey that meant no one aboard could be argued with, and it docked at the Academy with the clear intention of solving a small problem quickly. There were 5 of them, 2 Ordo, a Haven, an Ossen, and 1 member of a species so old and so rarely seen that most of the students had only read about it. They convened in the upper hall, which had not been used in 6 years, and they came in expecting a short session. The Academy had briefed them in advance. A human student had brought an unlicensed, dangerous animal aboard. The animal had attacked a 4th year in a service corridor. The obvious outcome was expulsion for the student and destruction of the animal, and the board had allotted 1 afternoon. They got 4 days. Nira presented first, because she had requested the session, and she spoke for 2 hours without notes. She showed the biometric overlay from the lecture hall, all 40 bands, 17 species, 1 shared spike inside 400 milliseconds against no measurable threat display. She showed the 2 catalog entries and the 11 cross-references between them. She showed the corridor incident, reconstructed from the maintenance log and the medical record. And she pointed out the thing everyone kept missing, that Braxol had walked away from it with a scored forearm and nothing else. "An animal that loses control tears," she said. "This one held. It held a plated limb between its teeth without cracking a seam. That is not restraint by accident. That is a level of control the Concord does not have a category for, and it was not being exercised by the animal." Then Salvo spoke, and that was the part that changed the room. He was not required to. He asked to. He stood up in front of the board with his white-ridged plating and 41 years of teaching behind him, and he said, out loud, into a record that would be read for a very long time, that the founding principle of his field was wrong. "I have taught for 4 decades that a hunter announces itself," he said. "That fear is cheaper than teeth. It is true. It is true on every world in the catalogue." He paused. "It is true on every world in the catalogue because the catalogue is ours. We did not discover a law of biology. We discovered a habit of our own neighborhood, and we wrote it down as a law because there was nothing nearby to contradict it. One of the Ordo asked him whether he was withdrawing his life's work. No, Salvo said, I am giving it a border. That is what should have been done at the start. Every principle should have a border. Ours did not, and so a hunter walked into my classroom, and I rated it category 5, and I stepped backward from it without knowing why. He sat down. Nobody spoke for a while. Daniel Reed was called on the third day. He came in alone. The animal was not with him, and the board noticed that and understood it as the deliberate thing it was. They asked him a great many questions. He answered all of them plainly. Yes, the breed had been developed for protection work. No, he had not trained it himself. Yes, it had opened the door, and no, he did not know exactly how, and no, he was not going to pretend he did. Then the awesome member of the board asked the question that everyone in the room had been circling for 3 days. Student Reed, why does your species build weapons that live in your homes? Daniel was quiet for a moment. That's the part I can't seem to explain to anyone here, he said. You keep asking me about the predator. You're all frightened of the predator. But we've had these animals for 30,000 years, and I don't think a single human being in that entire time has thought of one as a weapon. It put a Harvan on the floor. Yes, and then it stopped because I told it to, and then it went back to my room and slept on my bed. He looked around the hall. That's the strange part, not the teeth. You have teeth. Half the species in this Concord have better teeth than we do. The strange part is that 30,000 years ago my ancestors were cold and hungry and losing, and they had sharpened rocks, and there was a pack of apex predators following them across the ice, waiting for one of them to fall behind. He stopped. And they didn't build a better rock, he said. They walked out toward the thing that was hunting them, and they put food on the ground, and they sat down and waited. Most of them died doing it. They did it anyway. They did it for generations, and it worked. And after enough time, the thing that had been hunting them was sleeping next to their children, and after enough time after that we were giving them names. The hall was very quiet. You want to know what humans are? Daniel said. We're not fast, we're not strong. We heal slowly and we die easily, and there is nothing about us that should have worked. What we do is this. We find the most dangerous thing in the room, and instead of running from it or killing it, we walk toward it and we spend as long as it takes to make it ours. Not our slave, ours. It took us 30,000 years and we never once stopped. He looked at the board. You've been calling us Category 4 for 11 years, he said. Cooperative, you wrote that down like it was a weakness. The board deliberated for 1 day. Their ruling surprised everyone because they did not rule on the animal at all. They declined to reclassify it. It remained, in the Concord record, a domestic quadruped companion class, exactly as it had always been. They reclassified humanity instead. Category 1, the same tier as the 4 founding species of the Concord, granted to a member world with 11 years of standing and no fleet worth counting. The written justification was 3 lines long, and it was reproduced in every news service in Concord space within a day. Threat assessment must account not only for what a species can accomplish alone, but for what it can persuade other things to accomplish alongside it. Of the 18 member species, humanity alone has formed a lasting alliance with a predator capable of killing it. It did so before it possessed metal, and it has not stopped since. 6 weeks later, the West Wing lecture hall was full again. Salvo stood at the front with a projection open behind him, and the title of the new unit hung above his head in Concord script, Silent Predation. He had written the whole thing himself over the summer break, and it opened with an admission of error in the first paragraph, which several colleagues had told him to remove, and which he had refused to remove. In the seats, Tico sat on Daniel's right, talking too fast about a lab result, the way he always did now. Neera sat on the left with her slate already open, having read the material twice. Braxel sat 4 rows back. He did not speak to any of them. He had asked twice to transfer out of the course and had been refused twice, and so he came and took notes and said nothing and was quietly, permanently unimportant in a way that no injury could have achieved. And under the desk, out of sight of everyone, Rook was asleep with his head on his paws, making no sound at all. 40 students knew he was there. Not one of them looked down. They had all learned the same lesson that year, and they had learned it well enough that nobody in the room needed to say it out loud. Silence was not the absence of something dangerous. It was the sound danger made when it had already decided you were safe.